the Menendez case?
Well, when you think back, it was huge. The Menendez family was very wealthy. This was Beverly Hills. Murders just don't typically happen.
Kitty was my baby sister. There was a brutal murder.
Everyone from the gardener to the president had a view of what happened. I'm Jackie Lacey. I'm the former elected district attorney of Los Angeles County. Around watching TV when their adult sons came in with shotguns and slaughtered them.
August 20th, 1989, a frantic 911 call comes through just after 11:47 p.m. from a mansion on North Elm Drive in Beverly Hills. The voice on the line is panicked, breathless. "Somebody killed my parents! They shot and killed my mom and dad!" The dispatcher tries to calm him, but the screaming continues. When police arrive, they find Jose Menendez slumped over on the couch, shot in the head at point-blank range. His wife Kitty is nearby, riddled with 10 shotgun blasts. She had tried to run, crawled toward the hallway, and collapsed just feet from safety. Their sons, Lyle and Erik, are outside, curled up on the front lawn, crying, shaking. At first it seemed like a break-in, a violent crime by someone who didn't belong there. But something didn't sit right. The house wasn't ransacked, nothing was missing. And then came the first lie. A small inconsistency in their timeline, a tiny slip in their story. And that was when the investigation started to shift. What looked like a tragedy was about to unravel into one of the most disturbing family crime sagas in American history. On paper, the Menendez family looked untouchable. Jose Menendez, a Cuban immigrant with sharp instincts and sharper ambition, he had come to America with nothing, worked his way through college, and clawed his way into the upper tier of the entertainment industry. He was an executive at RCA, then later a high-ranking player at Live Entertainment, rubbing shoulders with celebrities, brokering million-dollar deals, always climbing. He had the house, the cars, the respect. Kitty, his wife, was different, quiet, polished, a former schoolteacher who put everything aside to raise their sons. People said she had a soft heart, but over the years she began to seem tired, distant, as if her smile was holding something in. Together they raised 2 boys, Lyle and Erik. Lyle was bold, outgoing, a natural extrovert who sometimes came off entitled. Erik was quieter, more sensitive, a promising tennis player. They lived in luxury, a Beverly Hills mansion with a pool, tennis court and security gates, European vacations, private schools, designer clothes. But for all the appearances of wealth and success, something underneath felt strained. Friends noticed it. Jose was said to be strict, not just about grades or curfews, but everything. He micromanaged, controlled, made all the decisions, even about what Erik could eat before matches. Kitty had once confided in a friend that she felt like she was disappearing. At dinner parties, people said the tension was subtle but present, the kind of unease you can't quite point to, but can always feel. The boys always polite but cautious, like they were walking on a line they couldn't afford to cross. And behind the doors of that mansion, whatever was happening stayed there. The family smiled in public. They played the part. But something was off. People close to them started to wonder, were they just kids growing up in wealth, reacting like any teenagers would? Or was something more serious going on? As detectives began their investigation, these questions came up again and again. And the more they spoke with family, friends, tutors, neighbors, the more they realized this wasn't just a family in grief. This was a house full of rules, secrets, silence. The picture-perfect family portrait? It was starting to peel at the edges. The Menendez mansion was quiet when officers arrived, but inside it was a bloodbath. Jose Menendez had been shot in the back of the head, twice. He was still in his recliner, one leg crossed over the other, remote in hand. He died without moving, without seeing it coming. Kitty, his wife, hadn't been so lucky. She'd been hit once, then tried to run. A second blast knocked her down, but she kept crawling toward the hallway, toward the stairs. The killers followed, 10 shots in total. She was hit in the arm, the face, the chest. One of the rounds was fired at point-blank range, so close it left a contact wound. The bodies were barely recognizable. Officers assumed it was a gang-style execution or a home invasion gone wrong. But then things started to feel off. The doors were still locked, the frames untouched. every lock exactly where it should have been.
Nothing had been taken. The jewelry was still in its case, the electronics untouched.
Even Jose's wallet was sitting right there on the counter. Most burglars don't leave a mansion without grabbing something.
This one
Left everything behind.
except 2 bodies and a mess of unanswered questions.
The brothers, Lyle and Erik, told police they had been out for the evening.
They said they'd gone to the movies, then grabbed a late-night snack.
But when investigators asked what they saw, they couldn't remember what movie it was.
Where they saw it, or even when it started.
And the more they talked, the less it made sense. What really caught detectives off guard, though, was what came next, the spending. Within days, the boys started living large. Lyle flew to New Jersey and bought a Rolex. Erik hired a private tennis coach. They leased Porsches. Dined at the most expensive restaurants in Beverly Hills. Lyle invested $550,000 into a restaurant. Erik bought a Jeep and started traveling for tennis tournaments. The spending totaled over $1 million in less than 6 months.
All of it from their parents' estate.
Their relatives and friends were stunned. No one could understand how 2 young men who had just lost their parents were now living like rock stars. The grief was gone, replaced by Armani suits and beachfront condos. Detectives stayed quiet at first. Inside that home, things weren't as they seemed.
This didn't look like the work of strangers.
It looked like something else, something that had been planned. Why would someone break in, kill 2 people so violently, and leave without taking a single thing except their lives?
Months passed. The murders faded from headlines.
But the questions didn't go away. The brothers said little. Their story never changed. But the investigation was still active, quiet, focused, watching. Then came the break. And it didn't come from police.
It came from Erik.
He had started seeing a therapist, Dr. Jerome Oziel. On the surface, it was grief counseling, but over time, the weight of what had happened became too much. Erik cracked. In a private session, he told the truth. He and Lyle had killed their parents. The words hung in the air. Dr. Oziel kept calm, but inside, he was panicking. He secretly recorded another session, this time with both brothers. He said it was to protect himself, but what happened next, no one could have predicted. His mistress, Judelon Smith, found the tapes. Furious over the state of their relationship, she contacted the police. And just like that, the secret was out. On March 8, 1990, nearly 7 months after the murders, Lyle Menendez was arrested. Erik, who had been in Israel for a tennis tournament, flew back and surrendered 3 days later. The case exploded. Cameras outside the courtroom, reporters on every corner. America couldn't look away. 2 clean-cut boys from Beverly Hills accused of murdering their own parents. But as the trial inched closer, it became clear. This wasn't just about 2 bullets and a crime scene. This was going to be about what no one had seen, what no one had talked about, what the brothers claimed they had lived through for years.
The courtroom was packed. Rows of reporters, news vans circling outside it.
It wasn't just a murder case anymore, it was a spectacle. The Menendez brothers were clean-cut, soft-spoken. They wore tailored suits and sat side by side, quiet, unreadable. And then came the defense. That's when everything changed. Erik and Lyle said they didn't kill their parents out of greed. They said it was out of fear. According to them, their father, Jose, had been abusing them for years. The stories were graphic, painful to hear. Erik said it started when he was 6. Lyle claimed Kitty knew and looked the other way. The boys said they'd begged for it to stop.
And when they realized it wouldn't, they made a decision. They bought shotguns, waited until their parents were watching a movie, and opened fire.
It wasn't cold-blooded, they claimed. It was survival. The prosecution didn't buy it. They argued this wasn't about abuse. It was about inheritance.
Jose Menendez had threatened to cut them off,
to rewrite the will, and hours later, he was dead. Prosecutors painted the brothers as entitled, manipulative, calculating. They didn't deny the killings. They didn't have to. The only question now was why. Was this the ultimate act of desperation or the ultimate betrayal? The jury heard months of testimony.
From friends, therapists, teachers, forensic experts.
They heard Erik sob on the witness stand, saw photos of Kitty's wounds, listened to recorded sessions with Dr. Oziel, where the brothers talked about the night in detail. Some jurors wept, others couldn't look. When the trial ended, they couldn't decide. One mistrial, then another. The country was split just like the courtroom. Were these boys victims of unthinkable abuse, or were they simply playing one final game and winning?
By the time the retrial began,
The country already knew their names. The headlines had quieted, the public was divided, and the defense, this time, wasn't allowed to bring cameras into the courtroom. No more national television, no daily sound bites.
just a quiet courtroom, and two sons on trial for their parents' murder.
The same crime, a different strategy. Prosecutors kept it simple. The brothers had everything to gain. Their parents were controlling but alive. After the murders, they had access to millions. They argued that the abuse claims were exaggerated, designed to manipulate a jury. And this time, there was no one watching at home, no outside pressure. The jury heard the taped confession again.
Heard Erik describing how he reloaded the shotgun, how he fired, how Kitty screamed. It was hard to listen to.
But without the television cameras, something shifted. Jurors were quieter, more focused, less distracted by public opinion. And when deliberations began, the verdict didn't take long. In March 1996, 7 years after the murders, Lyle and Erik Menendez were both found guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom was silent. Kitty's relatives cried. The brothers didn't. The judge handed down 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. They were taken away in handcuffs. No last goodbye. For many, that was the end of the story. But not for everyone, because some people never stopped wondering if the truth was more complicated than the verdict. Decades passed. Lyle and Erik Menendez were sent to different prisons, both serving life without parole. For a while, the story faded, until it didn't. In 2018, something surfaced. A letter, written by Erik when he was just a teenager. In it, he described the abuse, in his own words, in real time. It wasn't a courtroom performance, it wasn't a confession. It was a 17-year-old boy writing to a cousin saying he was scared to sleep, scared of his father, scared it would never stop. And that changed things. In 2023, another voice came forward, one no one expected. Roy Rossello, a former member of the Latin boy band Menudo. He said Jose Menendez had abused him too.
When he was a teenager, at the height of Jose's power in the music industry.
Suddenly, the old questions came rushing back. Were Lyle and Erik telling the truth all along? Had their voices been buried beneath wealth and shame and the need for a clear villain? The LA District Attorney's Office took another look. And in May 2025, 36 years after the murders, both brothers were resentenced.
Life in prison, yes.
But now, with the possibility of parole. The courtroom felt different this time. Less outrage, more silence. The public didn't know what to feel anymore. Were they calculating murderers?
Or were they damaged sons, failed by the people who should have protected them? That's the thing about truth.
Sometimes it comes too late.
Sometimes it keeps evolving.
The Menendez brothers have now spent more than 3 decades behind bars. They're no longer the boys America watched on television. Their hair is grey, their voices softer, their lives reduced to prison routines and court petitions. And yet their story still refuses to go quiet. New documentaries, social media debates, online communities calling for a second look. Not everyone agrees, and some believe the abuse claims were real, that the legal system failed to see past wealth and trauma. Others believe the verdict was right,
that what they did can never be justified.
but maybe this case was never meant to fit neatly into guilt or innocence. It was about power, control, fear, and what happens when silence stretches on for too long. 2 boys grew up in a house full of secrets, and when those secrets turned into gunfire, no one was ready for the truth.
Or maybe we still don't know it. Maybe we never will. But here's what we do know.
Jose and Kitty Menendez lost their lives that night, and whether their sons were broken or dangerous, the tragedy sits with all of them.
A family destroyed.
And a question that still echoes, even after all these years, what really happened inside that house? If this story made you pause,
If it left you questioning what's true, what's fair, and what's still hidden,
subscribe to True Crime O'Clock For more true crime documentaries that don't just tell stories, they ask the hard questions. Thanks for watching.